Hello everyone, my name is Josh and this is Whimsical and Interesting Musings. And today I bring you whimsical and interesting musings every day all year round. And today we're going to be focusing on the second part in the Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Two Towers. Now this particular film is really good. It's actually one of my favourites of the original trilogy, even though the entire trilogy is awesome. I still think that this trilogy does a very good job of taking some of the elements from the original story and kind of compressing them into this interesting narrative about basically separation. All the characters at this point have essentially separated. They've now gone to all these different quests. They all have their different side objectives and all these different other things going on. And where are they right now? So let's focus on the first half. The first half is focusing on Sam and Frodo on their journey to Mount Doom, into Mordor, to destroy the One Ring, the Ring of Power, the One Ring to rule them all, the One Ring to bind them, the One Ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. And yeah, they go on a very interesting series of circumstances. It all starts off when Frodo wakes up from a dream involving the climax of the original Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, with Gandalf falling down the dark pit and pursuing the Balrog. And in this sequence, it's kind of edited a little bit differently. The moment where Frodo yells "No" is kind of edited before it's kind of edited in before Gandalf falls, and then he falls, and it just shows him, falling into the pit and chasing the Balrog. This entire sequence is just amazing to show how very, very, courageous Gandalf is, because not only is he falling, which is an incredibly, it's one of those things where when you fall off something, your senses and your sense of motion and your sense of, just grabbing things just kind of goes out the window. But to Gandalf, who isn't just a wizard, he's an Astari, which is a spiritual being. He can now basically use his gifts of magic and just gripping things, basically take all the things that we take for granted when we fall, and putting them to good use. So he fights the Balrog, and the dream ends with them falling into a river or a lake. And Frodo wakes up and he's completely utterly shocked and worried, and then he just they just continue on their merry journey. Now there are two very different cuts of the original trilogies of the Lord of the Rings: the theatrical cut and the extended cut. The extended cut is a much better version because you really do get a lot more depth in regards to certain scenes. Like, say, for example, there is a moment where a character dies, and instead of in the theatrical cut, in fact, I'm going to talk about that when we actually get to the scene itself. Frodo and Sam are basically climbing down, depending on where you're watching it. If you're watching it in theatrical cut, they're at the top of this mountain and they look at Mordor, and then and then Frodo has this little bit of PTSD where he sees the Eye of Sauron and he just collapses to the ground, and Sam and Frodo decide to share a bit of lammas bread, which, if you don't know about Tolkien lore, is basically a piece of bread that's kind of like a cracker or something like that, or just a general piece of bread, and one bite is to fill the stomach of a grown man, and one small bite. But these hobbits, they eat a whole entire supply of them. In fact, there's a wonderful deleted scene in Fellowship of the Ring where Pippin and Merry eat a whole entire box load of lambus bread, and that's before Legolas gives them the lowdown that they actually only need to eat one bite in order to feel full. And that entire scene was hilarious, and there's even a scene where, it looks like he's about to, explode from being too full, Pippin. And that's a good scene. But yes, they eat lamb bread, and then they encounter Gollum, who, after a struggle, Gollum basically surrenders after he sees Sting again. because he associates that with the hobbit that stole his precious. So he agrees to, after some prodding and some very unsavoury acts of, humiliation, um, Gollum decides to agree to lead them to Mordor, to the Black Gate. And the entirety of their journey is basically trying to go from there to there. And cutting off, we follow Merry and Pippin, who are riding on the backs of Uruk-hai, who are trying to find shelter. They're both exhausted, and Pippin is the only one who's trying to keep his head above water, whereas he can see that Merry is very quickly starting to lose consciousness. He thinks he's dying, or he thinks he's very severely ill. And there's this very gruesome scene where where in the extended cut, Pippin sees that one of the Uruk-hai are actually drinking something, and Pippin thinks that, oh, my friend is sick, he needs water, and one of them goes, oh, does he? And he goes, give him some medicine, boys. And then he opens the bottle and then he pours it down Pippin's mouth, and it's revealed to be blood. Oh joy! And that entire scene was something, but I really do like it because it really does add a certain level of, continuity, because it tells you how the other goblins got to be in the party. The guy who says, let's make a maggot hole in your belly. that goblin, if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. When that character gets introduced, we don't know how he got there. We just know that, they're there, and there was no real explanation in the theatrical cut. Whereas in the extended cut, they actually have an entire scene where they basically say, "Our master grows impatient, and he wants the Shire Rats now." And then one of the Uruk-hai just goes, "I don't take all orders from orc maggots," and that's a really good scene. And but it's very weird because in the theatrical cut, or in the extended cut also, they say, well, why do they need to be alive? Ivan, he goes, oh, they have something, an elvish weapon. The master wants it for the war effort, and that's all we get. And apparently one of the goblins weren't told ahead of time that there was a special item that one of the hobbits were carrying. But yeah, apparently orcs are very stupid. So yeah, that was a whole scene, but we have this entire great moment where one of them says, what do you smell? And he says, man flesh. And then Pippin goes, Aragorn. And they just start to run away. And then we follow Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, who at the very end of the Fellowship of the Ring, they've just, sent Boromir, who dies very tragically, played by Sean Bean, on his merry way to the great afterlife. And they're now deciding to pursue Merry and Pippin and trying to rescue them. And their journey leads them to Fangorn Forest, to a huge pyre which has orcs, and apparently this was the handiwork of Éomer. And Éomer is a captain of the King's Guard who is of the house Rohan, essentially. And he's exiled by the king, who has been poisoned by the mind of Saruman, who is played by Christopher Lee in the original Fellowship of the Ring, and he's also played by him in the last two films as well. And he's also banished by Grima Wormtongue, who's played by Brad Dourif, who starred as Charles Lee Ray in the Chucky Child's Play films. And he's an amazing actor, and he does a very good job here. He also does a very underrated performance in a film called Exorcist 3, which I would highly recommend. It's one of my favourite underrated sequels to any horror film ever. It literally has one of the best uses of a jump scare I've ever seen in a movie, and I'd highly recommend Exorcist 3. But for now, Grima Wormtongue is a total bastard. He's basically a guy who is manipulating Theoden King, who's under this very vulnerable influence of Saruman, and he's also got a very pervy kind of fling with Éomer's sister Éowyn, and it's very cringy and very creepy to watch. But yeah, Éomer gets exiled, so it leaves Éowyn completely utterly vulnerable, and it's revealed that the hobbits were able to get away from the action when they were in the middle of the night trying to, when the Uruk-hai were trying to set up camp, and they actually get into an argument about who's going to be who. they actually make an escape while the riders of Rohan come in to finish them off. So, following their tracks, Aragorn deduces that they went to Fangorn Forest, and they might have incurred the wrath of a white wizard. And usually, when people think of the white wizard, they think of Saruman, the traitor. But when we actually meet the white wizard, it turns out that he is a little bit more than meets the eye. And when I saw the trailer, totally spoiled this moment for me, because when I first saw it, because I was under the impression that Gandalf was no more, he was gone. But when I saw him in the trailer for the Two Towers, I was so happy. Like, I had this biggest smile on my face, like, oh, Gandalf's alive, like, oh, it's great. And I had this biggest smile on my face in the cinema when I watched it. Like, I was so happy to see Gandalf back, and, in this new form, he's kind of leveled up, as it were, if you're familiar with the video game logic. But yeah, that was a great moment. And he tells the story that when he was fighting the Balrog, he effectively died, and he travelled through space and time, and he basically got reincarnated as the white version of Gandalf, because that's what Astaris do. Like, if they are prematurely killed before their task is done, they are basically taken from their bodies into another location to where they can upgrade their colours, and usually it's their robes or their their power abilities, because Gandalf is a very good wizard, but he didn't get the chance to actually demonstrate a lot of his powers in the original trilogy. But he is very clever with using fire, and he can use crystals that he has in his pocket that he can use to create light if he says a certain spell. So the wizards in the Lord of the Rings tend to use elements to kind of fuel their magic. And like, say, for example, the acorn scene in the Hobbit trilogy, where he basically uses acorns and pebbles to basically create fire from a spark with his staff. So moving quickly on, they go to Rohan, and Gandalf the White does the most awesome exorcism ever. And at the very beginning of the trilogy, in the Fellowship of the Ring, he has a small council with Saruman, and in the original cut and in the extended cut, they both have a duel. And it's kind of like the Wizard's duel in The Sword and the Stone, except in The Sword and the Stone it's more funny, and they get to turn into animals. It's more for comedic purposes, whereas this duel is much more intense and much more darker, and it does have that sense that these two are very powerful wizards. And it was very sad to watch one of my favourite wizard characters get his ass owned by his own mentor. And it's really horrible, and I really did feel sorry for him, because he just got pulled from pillar to post, and he even got, his ass handed to him in one of the scene where he's on the tower, and he's basically being tortured for information by Saruman. And it's really great. But then he drops the title. He says there's only one Lord of the Rings, only one that you can bend to his will, and he does not share power. And that's great. When he said that line, I thought, yeah, that's a great way of basically saying, I'm not telling you anything, and I'm going home now. Like, yeah, I love that entire moment. It's so awesome. Gandalf is just such an awesome character. He has such awesome moments as a character to really thrive, and really kind of have moments where he really shows how powerful he can be. But sometimes he doesn't always perform to his best. But that's because Saruman is a very powerful wizard, but the reason why he's so powerful is because he's had a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. Whereas here, he kind of has possessed Theoden King to a bit of an advantage, because he's possessing a very frail body. It can be very kind of difficult to fight back or to challenge him, because Theoden isn't powerful. He isn't a wizard. He isn't, he doesn't have any magical abilities, so he's kind of in a bit of a corner when he gets confronted by Gandalf. And it has this very wonderful scene where it's practically become a meme now, where Saruman as Theoden basically starts laughing hysterically when he tries to cure him of his ailment. And he just starts laughing hysterically, and he starts saying, "You have no power here, Gandalf the Grey." And he's like, "Bitch, please." And he just pulls off his grey cloak, and it's white. And he's like, "Oh, God, I did not expect that." And that entire moment, especially Theoden and Saruman's reaction. I thought, yeah, that was awesome. And he basically does an exorcism and exorcises Saruman from his body. And that entire sequence where Theoden kind of gets his senses back and he recognises Eowyn's face, it's such a beautiful moment. And that effect where it very slows him going from frail and old and very defeated and dying essentially to a healthier, more vibrant, more clear-headed younger man. Not too young, but a much younger man than what we saw. That was quite an impressive effect, and I just love it. I thought it was just such an incredible moment. And the moment where he basically acknowledges Gandalf, and he's even surprised to see that he's donned the white colours, and he just says, "Breathe the free air again, my friend." And I just love that moment. Like, yeah, I'll explain later. Like, I'll explain later that the insane ride I went through to get my white coats, and it's pretty damn awesome. And then there's that scene where he says, "Your fingers will remember their own strength better if they grasp to your sword," and he just pulls the sword out, and he just has that moment where he looks at it, and then he just basically looks at Wormtongue, who literally is not happy. He does not look like he's gonna have a good time, and it's just such a great moment because a lot of people. This is the point where I'm actually going to say something. I was not a fan of Aragorn as a character when I first saw The Fellowship of the Ring, because he was very mysterious. I like characters who are mysterious and a bit edgy and a bit badass, but I kind of don't like it when they don't have any moments of vulnerability. And there is only one moment of vulnerability in The Fellowship of the Ring, which I was very happy for, which is when he's fighting Lurtz at the very end. But I wasn't really a fan of his character up until that point. But here, and one of the criticisms that a lot of people give is that he can sell the Ranger of the North part, the Strider part, Viggo Mortensen, but he doesn't really show any kingly qualities. And the scene that follows kind of really almost, to me, shoots all those criticisms out of the water, because to me, I think he does show his very kingly attitude when he actually stops Theoden from striking Wormtongue, because yes, he deserves it. he deserves it well and truly. He's done some terrible things. He's been, aligning himself with a traitor. He's actually exiled a very important member of the guard, Aemir, and he deserves to be struck down with a sword by the king. And but Aragorn basically says, "No, you can't do this, and especially not in front of your subjects, because if they do, they'll think you're just as bad as Saruman and you're just as bad as Sauron. So you need to let him go, even though it's painful. You need to let him go." And he does. He does. He basically, yields and says, "Okay, I'll do it." And there's this really wonderful scene where he tries to get Grima Wormtongue to take his hand. Aragorn tries to get Grima Wormtongue to take his hand, but then he just spits on him. And I thought that's a great moment because it shows that Aragorn is actually trying to be civil here. He's not trying to, say that, oh, let's have a fight, let's have a brawl and everything like that. He'll only fight if he needs to. And I think that's something that was a really good character moment in the extended cut, because he mostly was just considered a badass for a good long while, and he was just kind of like this edgy guy who just kind of fought a lot. Whereas he had a little bit more character in this one. And I really liked it. So they decide, after a really beautifully done funeral scene in the extended cut, and in the theatrical cut, it cuts right away to Theoden at the grave of his son, Theodred. And it's a really beautiful scene. It's a very beautiful scene because it shows how he feels very guilty that he, that he has to live while his son is dead. He's basically, his son is his heir, essentially. And he should live to see the last days of his house, meaning that, he has to now bear the curse of living on while his son is dead, essentially. And it's just such a beautifully acted scene. The guy plays Theoden does a really good job here, because he shows how much sadness and how much regret. Because when Theodred was out fighting the orcs and doing his part for the war, he was essentially possessed by, or under the weather, under Saruman's influence. So that really does feel like a dagger to the heart kind of thing. But they decide to move from the homestead of Rohan to Helm's Deep, a great fortress that a lot of the lords of Rohan often retreated to when they were in times of difficulty and strife. So they take all the women and children, all the villagers of poorer stock to Helm's Deep to basically hold out the war effort. And during this time, fighting a few wargs, um, Aragorn falls off a cliff and he's presumed dead until he shows up later on in a very awesome scene where he pushes the doors open. Gandalf has gone off to get the riders of Éomer, and while we're on the topic, Merry and Pippin don't do very much. They meet a character by the name of Treebeard who gives them lots of sage advice and lots of information about the nature of the forest and how good Saruman was to nature and the world and the earth, and then he all of a sudden, got corrupted by Sauron and fell under his allegiances. That does have an important point because it does lead to the eventual battle that goes on later in that particular story. But in regards to Gollum and Sam and Frodo, they reach the Black Gate and they are ready to go in, but they are completely utterly sidetracked by a march of Easterlings, who are these humanoid soldiers who look human, but if you actually know the lore of Tolkien, they're actually vampiric in nature, and they're very kind of hideous looking underneath that underneath those helmets and underneath those veils. And think, if you will, of, in Mortal Kombat you have Baraka, who is a Tarkatan warrior, which is basically a warrior with a very beast-like appearance or very wide, sharp teeth. Baraka and Melina are kind of the same sort, whereas an Easterling would be more like Melina in the sense that she has a veil obscuring her mouth area, and if you remove that veil, you see the teeth of the Tarkatan warrior. It's kind of like that in many cases. But yeah, they go to the Black Gate. They decided to go through after the armies marched through, but Gollum just basically tells them, there's another way, there's another route to the into Mordor. We can take it. It's the Great Stairs that lead all the way up to, the top of the mountain and all the way up to the top of the cave, which has Shelob in it. And this is actually very important if you've read the book, because in the book they meet Shelob in the halfway point or in the climactic point, where it kind of goes back and forth between the fight between Shelob and Frodo and Sam to the Battle of Helm's Deep. And there was a reason why they cut it out, because they wanted an extra little hook for the third film, which is understandable. But instead, while they are camping one night, Gollum decides to remove Gollum from his own character personality, and he decides to adopt Smeagol full time after having a previous conversation with Frodo about it, because he's forgotten his identity up until that point. And the reason why he remembers the name Smeagol, why Frodo has the name Smeagol embedded into his memory, is because there's a deleted scene in Fellowship where Gandalf basically tells him that his name was Smeagol before the ring drove him mad. So he decides to adopt the persona of Smeagol. And during their camping trip, they get sidetracked by another march of Easterlings, and they in themselves get ambushed by agents of Gondor, who are led by I've forgotten his name. He's the brother of Boromir. Yeah, and please let me know in the comments who this guy's name is. He's the brother of Boromir, and he's one of the agents of Gondor. And they basically take them back to the camp, their own personal settlement underneath a waterfall, and they don't know who they are. They think they're orc spies. They think they're halfling, just random people. They're agents of Sauron or Saruman, and they have no idea who they are. So they keep them prisoner for a while, interrogating them every so often. They don't go to extreme tortures or anything like that. But Boromir's brother is very kind of suspicious of them. And he even tells them that, you know, my brother died at some point, and they're really shocked, like, dead? How? When? And he goes, well, as one of your companions, I was hoping you'd tell me, but they have no idea because they weren't there when he died. So, and the last time Frodo saw Boromir, he basically just went mad and he went crazy and he wanted to kill him essentially after, you know, the ring was not given to him. So they decide to just take them to Osgiliath, which is the kind of ruined settlement of the Gondorians when they are basically strapped, essentially. Osgiliath is basically their version of Helm's Deep, except Helm's Deep is a much more strong, fortified stronghold, whereas Osgiliath feels just like a ruin and no one's really there and everything just feels isolated and alone, but it's a good place to stock up if there's an oncoming battle. So it's a useful place to be in. But yeah, that happens, and then there's a whole entire thing at Helm's Deep. The Battle of Helm's Deep is one of the best battles I think you will ever see in a modern motion picture ever, because I think what really is important is that you see the scale, you see the weight of this particular thing, and it really does sell to you the incredible scale of these characters and what they're actually going through. So it's an amazing set piece. It's fantastic. It's got great action sequences. At the last minute, thanks to Lady Galadriel and her discussion with the head of Rivendell, Elrond, he decides to allow some of his soldiers, some of his elven soldiers, some of the woodland soldiers of Mirkwood to go out and to help the Battle of Helm's Deep, to help the Rohirrim in their battle for Helm's Deep. And there's a really great moment before the battle where Saruman is preparing the bombs that they're going to put under the keep, and Growing Wormtongue has a candle, and he goes, how can fire dupe stone? What kind of device could break down the wall? And he's leaning over and he has the candle right there, and Saruman just holds his hand back and he just says, please, if you know what's good for you, you wouldn't go anywhere near that. That's such a good moment. I love that moment. Just the look on Christopher Lee's face when he holds his hand back. It's like, yeah, you don't want to go anywhere near this with that. Like, it's just brilliant. And yeah, I just love their dynamic. They're very well cast as villains. And it really is great when you see that entire armada of Uruk-hai orcs just outside the gates of Isengard, outside of the castle. It really is overwhelming, and it really does give you that sense of, wow, they're literally not effing around here. They know exactly what they're going to do, and they're going to do it right now. And yeah, that happens pretty much for it. That the entire set piece of the Battle of Helm's Deep is fantastic. Seeing all these, you know, great set pieces of Uruk-hai basically going at the wall, trying to blow it up, trying to get inside to the immediate stronghold, to the king, and to, you know, all these other things. And whenever a character would shout the words, draw your sword, I'd always, you know, say, get out your sketch pad and start drawing swords. That's a little lame joke that I used to do back when I used to watch these as a child. And but yeah, I love this film. It's fantastic. I love the little exchange between Legolas and Aragorn. They literally are the perfect example of a bromance. Like, they literally are, you know, these two best friends who've known each other for years. And they get into a little bit of an argument before the battle where Legolas thinks that this army is not going to be enough to fight the... And this is before they find out that the elves get involved. The elves at Mirkwood get involved. So they think that all these men and all these children wearing armour and shields are not going to be enough to fight back on these things. And they're all doomed to die. And Aragorn just says that I shall die as one of them. And he says it in a very hot... in a very loud, high voice. It says it in a very loud, very angry voice. So, yeah, he's very angry at Legolas for thinking that, you know, for thinking so little of this, you know, camaraderie, and kind of almost being like a little bit of a action snob, if you think about it, or a little bit of a combat snob, because he's such a a very hands-on soldier. He's like a one-man army. He could take on a lot of these guys single-handedly. They literally take his single-man army motif to a whole new level in the third film. And if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, he kind of just basically shoves it off and says, yeah, they're frightened. I can see it in their eyes and things like that. And I just felt like, dude, just because you're a one-man army and you can take on the entirety of this army single-handed does not mean you get the right to criticise other people when there's massive numbers of them. But yeah, this was a great set piece. I really liked a lot of the scenes where I like the scene where Aragorn and Gimli try to go out the back of the tower to kind of give Theoden and his men time to prepare, and he just says, you know, what are we going to do? We can take them. And then Gimli just says, just toss me over there and I'll sort it out. And he goes, what? And he goes, I can't jump over there. You have to toss me. And things like that. And he goes, oh, don't tell the elf. Because he said in the very in the first film, nobody tosses the dwarf and he just jumps. So apparently Gimli learned his lesson there and says, you know, all you need is a little hand every once in a while. But yeah, that was the whole thing, and that was a great moment. But yeah, there's so many great moments. There's a scene where the Wilhelm scream is heard. You know, that high pitched ah, that scream that people hear in films occasionally. That scream is heard at one point. And yeah, it's a really great moment, and I love the moment at the very end where Theoden King is considering giving up. He's considering, you know, just basically waving the white flag and saying we surrender, and you can take us dead or alive, but we will surrender to you. And Aragorn just basically says, you said this fortress will never fall, your men defend it, but now they're literally, you know, dying to defend it, so what are we going to do? And he says, well, it doesn't matter. Like, you might think that you could give up, but I'm not going to condemn the women and children to a fate worse than death, because he's trying to rescue Merry and Pippin. And as far as he's concerned, he's failed at that, but he's still leaving that hope alive that they are alive out there, they are okay. But he feels like he deserves to at least, you know, have some sense of protecting someone, sense of keeping someone safe, and he decides to take them to Mountain Pass, which he hears from one of Theoden's right-hand men. And there's this wonderful scene where Aragorn tries to convince them to just fight. Let's just fight, ride out and meet them head on, and basically just fight to the last man and do it for Rohan, for your people. And there's this really great moment where Theoden just basically goes, may this be the hour we draw swords together, and they basically you know, down for wrath, now for ruin, and the red dawn, and he gets his helmet on and he just shouts, and the horn blows, and they raise their swords and they charge with their horses. Oh, it's so good. I love it. It's fantastic. And then when they're in the middle of fighting all these Uruk-hai, Aragorn looks up and he sees Gandalf on the hill with the with Éomer's guards, the rest of the horsemen, and they're about to charge into battle. And the Uruk-hai prepare that they have their spears ready to, you know, just shove into their sides or whatever. But Gandalf has a little something up his sleeve. He uses the sunlight from the east, and you could say it was magic, but we could say it was just simply an act of really good strategy. But either way, it works. Like, and this really wonderful scene where they just charge and they just take out all the Uruk-hai. And then Merry and Pippin decide to use the trees to fight back against Isengard. And there's a wonderful set piece where both Treebeard eventually gets this inspiration after most of his tree friends are basically cut down and used for building weapons and manufacturing more Uruk-hai for, you know, for the war effort. So Treebeard decides, F that noise, and he goes off and, you know, has an army, and he decides to go and have his little mini war with Isengard. And it's an amazing sequence as well. This entire film is fantastic because there's a lot of great moments in this story where you really do feel the weight of this entire thing. because there's this moment where Arwen is waiting for Aragorn's return. She's literally waiting in Rivendell, and he said Riverdale there, wrong franchise. Yeah, in Rivendell, waiting for her beloved, and Elrond just basically says, "Why do you linger here when there is no hope?" And she says, "There's always hope." And there's this wonderful moment where Elrond says, by the bitter despair and the decay of time or the sword, Aragorn will die, and there will be no comfort for you, no comfort to ease the pain of his passing. And it reminds me of a story from the from Tolkien lore, where basically, and there is even a hint to it in the Fellowship of the Ring. There's an extended cut where Aragorn is singing a song, and he basically tells Frodo. Frodo asks, who is this woman that you sing of, and he says, it's the story of Brendorn and Luthien, who are an elven woman and a male lover, essentially. They have this love affair, but it can never happen because he's immortal and she's an elf, and they live much longer than humans do, and their love is doomed. And it's a very tragic story. It's actually a very interesting story. It's one of the more interesting stories of the extended Tolkien lore, but she basically feels the weight of Luthien's dilemma, where she feels like, even though she chooses a mortal life, there will always be this horror of he will outlive her, or she will outlive him, and she'll have to watch him die. She'll have to watch over his tomb. She'll have to stay by him and ease the comfort of his passing. But no one will be able to comfort her because all the humans won't know what she's going through or won't empathise. And her family won't be there. Elrond won't be there. Her family, her friends, they won't be there to comfort her and help her through this difficult transition because they'll all be going to the Great Havens. So that really adds an extra layer of sadness to proceedings, because we know that we're hoping and praying that these two get together, because there definitely is a chemistry there that they make it very clear from the very beginning. From the moment she shows up, they tell you right from the off that they have history, they have a romantic entanglement. But it's pretty much left on the back burner for the majority of this story. But the majority of it is done through memories that Aragorn has from the first film that we didn't see, which is a great use of taking material from the extended cut of Lord of the Rings and basically condensing them into these little short bursts of scenes. And but in the extended cut, you can still see these things wholesale anyway. And it's a very weird decision, but I actually really do respect it, because they are at least trying to fill in those gaps and giving purpose. But yeah, the final arc before we end this is Frodo and Sam have gone to Osgiliath, and they are being pursued. He's being hypnotized by the wraiths on the dragons, on the greyback dragons, and he nearly gives in to Sauron, and it's only when they actually escape Osgiliath and Boromir's brother agrees to let them go that it's all well and good, and they can move on with their journey. But Gollum, having been captured by the agents of Gondor and horrifically beaten, and feeling that Frodo had betrayed him, Gollum comes back and he decides to manipulate Smeagol, and Smeagol decide to manipulate both. Gollum and Smeagol decide to manipulate the hobbits together into going into the cave where Shelob is. And that's where The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers ends. And this is a fantastic film. It's one of my favourites of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It definitely is a great example of how you use these multi-stranded narratives, and you kind of build them to an interesting conclusion, because you've got two really important stories. The stories of Frodo and Sam, that's the main one, and then we have the storyline between Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. And this entire thing is basically revolving around them. And then we have in the middle Merry and Pippin, who are the characters who are the ones who are being made top priority and wanting to get rescued. But they just basically wander for a good portion of the story, and their plot does start to interweave into the main story in some way. But it really just kind of for a while they're just kind of with Treebeard, and their entire story just feels like light relief for a while. But then there's this moment um, where Merry and Pippin are trying to decide, what about Saruman? Have you come to a decision about him? And Treebeard just goes, no, no, don't be hasty, Master Meriadoc. And he just goes, hasty? Our friends are out there and they need our help. They can't fight this war on their own. And that's when Treebeard basically says, you are young and brave, but your part in this tale is over. Go back to your home. And it's only when they're actually on Treebeard and they're actually walking around in the forest for the for however long they have, that Pippin decides to go south to Isengard and to actually declare war on them. And it's a great scene because at first you don't really know where it's going, or they just feel like wandering characters for a while, but then their plot lines come together with the killing of the trees. And then the trees come back, and the extended cut when the Uruk-hai go back into the forest and they're a tree, and they want to go back to Isengard, but then they get stopped by all the trees in Fangorn Forest. So, yes, it's a pretty amazing story how everything ties together. But what I really love about the way this storyline is handled in the extended cut is everything fits together. Whether you're watching the theatrical cut or whether you're watching the extended cut, it all fits together in some way. And it always adds something to the story much later on. Even if it doesn't necessarily feel necessary that they tie in those little bits and they tie, Merry and Pippin to everything else that's going on, it does make sense when you watch the third film why they needed to go to Isengard and destroy it once and for all. So it does make sense on some level. So it is actually a very well structured and very well thought out film. And I feel like even the extended stuff, which people can say that, oh, it doesn't really feel necessary because the scene still continues on as normal, it still flows nicely. The filmmakers did a very wonderful job of actually trying to keep it very much as it is and still manage to make a very good product out of it. Now, before this video ends, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 stars, by the way. It's a fantastic film. My Return of the King video will probably be a little longer because I've got a lot of other things to do that I want to review. And I'm currently watching Avatar Last Airbender, so I will be tackling my review of that and going, series by series. And another thing that I want to do is a musical for Musical Mondays. And I want to say, because I have been speaking about this with someone, I am going to be doing television-themed musicals as well. So I'll be doing Glee, I'll be doing musical episodes of TV shows. So that means I'll be returning to 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps and talking about the musical episode, but I'll also be talking about the musical episode of Buffy. So I'll be tackling all sorts of different types of musicals in media as well. So I won't just be talking about musical films. I'll be talking about musical specials and musical musical themed TV shows like Glee and what have you. So look forward to those, and I'll be doing another sitcom comforts video later on in the day. And I've got a few book reviews I want to also do a video on. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like it, please leave a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, and look forward to more videos. Have a good day. This has been Josh with Whimsical and Interesting Musings, bringing you whimsical and interesting musings every day, all year round. Take care, God bless, bye-bye for now.